Yeah, because the power supply runs out
power
of...
supply. So
Right.
I've ran into this myself where I had the volume like cranked on my receiver, all 7 channels running, and then it just shut down because I'm like,
It's like, help me.
Yeah.
Today is the 4th of July.
Is it now?
And I think that's just a U.S. holiday. But anyway, everyone puts out their flags and fireworks go off and
Grilling.
a lot of grilling, steaks and hot dogs and hamburgers and outdoor parties and beer and all that good stuff that goes along with it. So, yeah, it's a good day, good excuse for families to get together and enjoy this summer.
Technically, that's where we are right now.
Yeah,
Outside.
yeah. Well, not today, but...
Well, today, 4th of July.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
because
yeah.
that's today.
Oh, yeah, today. Oh, sorry, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we're not actually filming this on the 4th of July. So,
Oh,
yeah.
You ruined the magic.
Yeah, I hate to ruin everyone's fun, but it's
Yeah.
a few days prior to... Yeah. But we're in the mood. We're in the spirit of it.
Oh, sure.
So anyway, we're supposed to talk about a confusing topic on amplifiers. And it's probably more confusing with headphones because you don't really run into it as much with speakers because they kind of give you a watt rating. But with headphones, you don't always get it. And that's the difference between the gain of an amplifier and the power output of the amplifier. And a lot of times they go hand in hand, but a lot of times they don't.
Yeah, they can, but especially on portable gear, you see some hardware that really tries to get the most out of the amplifier, so they have a lot of gain, way too much gain. And that pretty much means you could keep turning the volume up and it'll keep getting louder, but it runs out of power at some point and you'll get clipping, distortion, all kinds of non-desirable noises. And you see it less on desktop, especially on like 2-channel. It's pretty uncommon. Usually you have enough power. It's pretty uncommon other than at very loud volumes to run in the clipping. But it is, unfortunately, a difficult topic to get across. So you see a lot of confusion with headphones.
Sometimes even an amp that doesn't have power, but it might have gain,
Yeah.
might not clip. But in other words, it'll play really loud, but it'll sound like it has no bottom end, no balls, no nothing. You know, so it's putting out the voltage, which is gain, but it doesn't have the current to back it. So I guess technically it might clip, but I've heard a lot of small amps that don't have a lot of power that sound like small amps because they're not really providing power. They're just throwing voltage at the load.
It depends on how they
It's
clip.
hard to explain.
Right, that's the complicated thing, because sometimes they clip in a nasty way and it sounds awful and really sharp and it sounds like digital basically.
Right.
And other times they clip really soft and you could barely tell.
Well, it's like
And-
tube amps, They clip completely differently, right?
Yeah, right.
It very much depends on the design. So sometimes when the amp's clipping, you could barely tell. It just sounds anemic. Maybe it just is a little light in the bass. Maybe it just gets a little quieter, or maybe it just sounds a little funny or something like that, or you're missing some part of the music for the most part. But other times it's super, super harsh. And that's part of the challenge. It's hard to really know the difference. Depends on the design of the amplifier.
And so you really got to look at the wattage rating of the amp to be able to know if you have a headphone. Let's back up. If you have a headphone that requires a certain amount of power, and you know it's demanding for power, you need to pay attention to the actual wattage rating of the amplifier. A lot of amp manufacturers and headphones don't necessarily give you gain ratings, which is expressed in dB. I think most of the headphone amps probably run, it depends on the size of the amp. They're usually in the teens, 14, 15, 16 dB, where speaker amps will be in the 20s, 25, 26 dB gain. But anyway, this is really confusing things because speaker amps inherently have a big power supply because they're made to drive 8 ohm loads.
Not always. The one example I can think of where I ran into this problem is in receivers. I think they actually actively don't put big enough power supplies in.
Well, yeah.
Because if you were driving 7 channels, you got to watch the ratings. It says 105 watts a channel, right?
Yeah.
But when you look into it, that's 1 channel driven.
Yeah, because the power supply runs out of...
So
Right.
I've ran into this myself where I had the volume cranked on my receiver, all 7 channels running, and then it just shut down because I'm like,
It's like, help me.
Yeah.
There's actually a lot of complexity here, though.
Yeah.
Because power is a challenging topic as well. you could have an amplifier that's rated at 8 watts, 20 watts, 50 watts or something, and it sounds, wow, that's impressive. It has plenty of power. However, if you have high impedance headphones or low impedance headphones, you get wildly different output from the amplifier. Because really what the amplifier does effectively is make voltage. Whether or not it could drive current into that voltage and as a result deliver power, that's dependent on the design.
Yeah, I ran into that too with a receiver at a friend's house. He had some a multi-channel system that was in the house when he bought it, and the speakers were all 4 ohms, and he was just using whatever receiver he had, and it didn't like that. It kept shutting down at like medium volumes. So, and he's like, I can't figure out what's wrong. Nothing, because it kept saying it's shorted.
Yeah, a lot of the lower end receivers are rated for like 6 ohms and up, and the reason is because when you go below that, it's, I mean, a 4 ohm speaker draws at the same volume setting on an amplifier or a receiver. A 4 ohm speaker draws twice as much current as an 8 ohm speaker. And the loudness is a different issue. It depends on the efficiency of the speaker. So you can't say that just because a 4 ohm draws more current that it's louder. It's not necessarily the case. It's drawing more current, which means it's drawing more power for the same setting, volume setting. So yeah, impedance matters, and that's like with headphones too. Headphones varied wildly. You could have 16 ohms, you could have 10 ohms. Some of the in-ears are 5, 6.
Yeah.
I mean, that takes a lot of current to drive that. Some power supply to really do it.
And usually you don't see beefy power supplies in headphone amplifiers. That's for a few reasons. A lot of times they don't want it, because if you are driving a headphone that is very sensitive or low impedance, you run an increased risk of damaging it if you have a power supply to be able to drive too much power into it. So it's kind of a safer bet to put an anemic power supply in and just know that the power is going to collapse, know that the voltage is going to drop under load effectively. But what it does mean is sometimes you have the situation where you have a headphone that could be a bit demanding, and you turn the volume up and it gets louder, but then you hit a dynamic part of the music where it really needs more power. You get a big bass rumble or something like that. Everything gets really loud, and the voltage could shoot way down. You could kind of overload the amplifier.
Well, the amp just stalls. It doesn't seem like
it
it's really
runs out.
Getting any louder. You perceive like it almost like it gets noisier, right? The loudness it seems like it's getting louder,
right?
And it's actually getting noisier because the amp just has no more power to put out,
right?
So you're turning up the gain with the volume control, but there's no more power to give out, so it stops at some point. So it sounds actually I would say it sounds noisier.
That's kind of the good way to put it, I suppose. It's just basically the more you turn the volume up at some point with an anemic power supply and an amplifier, you just get distortion. You get more and more distortion. And sometimes it's super audible and it's obvious, and you turn it down a crack and it goes away. Other times it slowly fades in, which is kind of like the worst part, because sometimes it's kind of hard to tell what's going on, and you keep turning the volume up and it just keeps getting louder, so you get the impression you have the power, but you actually don't, unless you hook it up to like an oscilloscope or
It's kind of like
something to measure it.
It's kind of like plugging like a higher end headphone into a laptop. You go up in volume all the way up, and like that's it. It's just whatever it's doing. That's it. It just never really gets loud. That just shows you don't have enough of anything, really. You don't have enough
Well, it's
power.
not enough gain or power.
Yeah, right. You're out of everything.
Yeah,
you
that's
know?
a different problem.
Yeah.
But I guess like especially in like desktop amps, or not desktop, but like speaker amps, the other reason is it costs money to put a bigger power supply in too.
Right.
So especially in like receivers and stuff, when you're paying $300 for it, they're not spending a lot on it.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, if you're driving 100 watts a channel times 7, it means you need at least 700 watts available from the power supply at DC, which is, in the efficiencies and stuff, it being maybe 50-60% on a typical amplifier.
You need a lot.
You're talking a 1,500 watt power supply,
right?
And it's like, well, that's not cheap. That's basically its own box right there. That's 35 pounds right there.
And you look at the little dinky power cords that they always come with, right? You're not drawing 1,500 watts through that power cord.
Yeah, no.
So usually the numbers you see as a consumer can be very misleading, especially on low-cost consumer goods like receivers. And there's issues with that, because the trouble is now the expectation from consumers are that a lot of power is cheap, because you, for whatever reason, are marketed these crazy high power ratings on amplifiers. And it's sort of misleading. You not only usually don't need that much power, but it really isn't that cheap to do a good job at a lot of power.
Yeah, well, the best example I can think of is Macintosh makes like a 5-channel amp, and you see it's like humongous and big iron,
Yeah.
and that's 120 watts or whatever.
That's
channel
really
times,
120
yeah,
watts.
that's whatever
Yeah.
it is. Yeah,
It's probably 20 grand.
yeah, that's
too.
what it takes. Yeah.
Yeah. It weighs about 100 pounds. But yeah, I mean, that's the point, right? I mean, you get what you pay for in terms of amplification and power supplies and what they're capable of. You really do. And it's just the way it works. A lot of the amps now, a lot of the newer ones, not all of them, but a lot of the lower cost ones are running Class D power supplies. So they can be lightweight.
Mhm.
Some of them have external bricks or whatever you want to call them, tabletop supplies that, again, are Class D and they're switching supplies, and they're a lot more efficient. The quality of those varies wildly. I mean, it just depends on the manufacturer, how noisy they are. Some are really great, and some aren't. So, I mean, if it's a well-known brand and they pay particular attention, those type of power supplies could be very efficient and effective, and they don't weigh so much. And so you see that built into a lot of the receivers nowadays, I think, and they're going that way with power.
I mean, it's a bit different with headphones when you only need a couple watts. It ain't no big deal.
Yeah, you kind of have your choice.
Yeah.
You can go switching, do a good job of it, or you can go with a linear supply, which means it has a transformer and diodes and so on. And it's an old school. A lot of people in high end consider that to be a better power supply, a linear versus switching. But some of the custom made switching supplies that are in amps nowadays that are made by the amp manufacturer are pretty good. They really refine the quality of it. It probably could even excel the abilities of a linear supply.
Well, especially because it seems like the way people implement linears, they kind of just like pick a slapdash design off the internet and slam it in and call it a day and say, oh, it's a linear, it's perfect.
Yeah.
And over a narrow region, that's kind of true, but not when you're talking about the extremes or when you're overloading the supply. And unfortunately, it still does cost money if you want to overbuild it. So you see sometimes supplies that are way overbuilt on headphone amplifiers, and they could deliver 50 watts or something ridiculous, and they only need 2 or 3. And that could kind of be confusing as well, because sometimes you see this huge power supply on the side of thing, and it's not really necessary oftentimes, but maybe there's some minor benefit from it.
Yeah, it's essentially a speaker amp
Yeah,
that they
right.
put a headphone
small
jack-
speaker
yeah,
amp.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, the supply is big enough to drive like an 8-ohm load, but the output devices, there are not enough output devices to do it, so don't do it. But yeah, where they've overbuilt the supply so that the current, it never runs out of current given its load. It never runs out of power given its load, given the volume control, all that. But but at some point everything will run out of power. I guess if you throw heavy enough load on it, sooner or later it's just going to run out. But bottom line is that so the difference between gain and power is kind of like volume versus raw energy
Grunt.
or current. Yeah, the ability to really drive and deal with dynamics and go over and beyond what it needs to do when musical peaks occur. And that's a real power supply. That's a really low output impedance on the amp. Usually you're going to have multiple output devices in parallel to help lower that output impedance and drive the headphone. Particularly with dynamic headphones where their impedance may vary at different parts of the frequency response. You don't want the amp varying too. You want it to be stable, rock solid. Doesn't matter what you plug into it, it's doing its job. And that's the sign of a very high quality amplifier.
Yeah.
Rock stable.
Rock stable.
Something like that.
I think the dictionary definition, or at least technical definition of an amplifier, is a constant voltage source.
Well, they can be.
Yeah, if into any impedance. But obviously,
Yeah.
I remember years ago we used to talk to some of the amp guys like Sim Audio and that, and they'd be like, we'd like to make an amplifier that will run into a 0 ohm load. And I'm like, well, do you realize you can't do that because it's called infinity? You need to talk to the Corel about that. It's infinite current.
Well, even that wasn't
But we'd
infinite.
still like to do a 0 ohm load. I said, you're not going to be able to do that. But maybe half an ohm, But that's the idea with these huge audiophile amps you spend 50 or 100 grand for, is that they have a power supply that will just wipe out the breaker panel if it needs
Right.
to.
It's unnecessary.
Yeah.
You don't really need it, but
Just the whole house goes down if you really hit a good note and the speakers blow. But yeah, they're capable of it. They have a power supply that can put out 1,500 watts or 2,000 watts or something per channel.
Well, it's true. It's kind of safety device having an NEMA amp, though. You can't blow anything up.
Yeah. Well, with headphones, yeah. And same with speakers. Yeah.
Okay, it's harder.
But now it's kind of a even more difficult to talk about topic because you could have situations where the clipping could damage things because
The
of the
tweeter.
amplifier design. And if you have a crossover, it could cause issues.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and actually with receivers, I've seen back in the day when I worked for Bowers, we've seen a lot on the lower end speakers, they would pop tweeters all the time, and it was always because they were running receivers that were 50 or 100 watts, and like you said,
Yeah.
you take them outside, you have a party,
Right.
you crank this
crank it.
receiver, and it's just clipping all
Yeah.
the time, and that clipping is a high frequency harmonic that goes right through the crossover, right to the tweeter. So that square wave, anything that
Yep.
squares off, the tweeter's taking the brunt of it, and tweeter's only good for a couple watts usually. So it doesn't take much to pop tweeters.
Well,
know?
is that why they implemented that active, whatever they called it in the old BMWs?
Yeah, they had a relay.
Yeah, because
with a
my
Zener that
speakers
would-
have that.
Yeah, it used to APOC, I think they called it.
It had a name.
APOC, automatic protection. It used this thing, a Zener or diode as a reference, and it would just, if it saw too much voltage coming in the speaker,
Yeah.
it would use the amp's power to power a relay and open the speaker. That basically disconnected the speaker. I don't know what it did to the amp though. I don't know if it threw it into a dummy or just opened it.
Oh,
I
yeah.
guess the relay acted like the load. It ran the coil on the relay, but close enough. But yeah,
I saw that they put a little light, and the 800s had it too.
yeah,
There's a
red
little,
LED,
little
on the
red
front.
LED on
Yeah.
the bottom of the speaker.
Yeah,
I saw my right channel one come out one time.
yeah,
There was something wrong with the track in one channel, and then
yeah.
it kicked on. I'm like, oh,
Yeah, they were made not to really ever come on.
That was after 20
You
years
really-
of using it.
Yeah,
and I
you
was,
really would ever see it.
Yeah.
Normally when you see it, there's a problem. Like the amplifier just went full DC and rail voltage out
Right.
for whatever reason.
Mhm.
Anyway, we're getting off topic. We're going way overboard.
Oh, yeah.
For those who are a little more savvy into this end of it, they know what we're talking about. But yeah, it's the trials and
Whether they don't
tribulations.
need to watch this video.
Mm.
Yeah, well, that's true. There's probably very few people left here at the end of this one.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Anyways, generally the issue is in portable amplifiers where you run out of one and not the other, and then you get trouble. You have extra power, you have extra gain, and the specs say it should be able to do it, but there's always some part of the equation that's missing. A little less common with desktop, except some specific amplifiers that are geared towards special headphones that have weird configurations.
Yeah, for the most part, even if a desktop amp doesn't have enough power, you could just have it full volume.
Usually you
and
could
it's
just
probably
crank it and
fine,
you won't
yeah.
get a lot of distortion. You won't
Yeah.
get all kinds of weird stuff going on. But in portable, it's common. You crank the volume, it just goes terrible. It's all distortion. And that's typically because it runs out of power, doesn't run out of gain, and it keeps trying to amplify it even though it just doesn't have any power to back it. So the signal gets all distorted and screwed up.
Yeah, and the reason being a portable device is running off of a battery. It doesn't
Yeah.
have the wall outlet to draw hundreds of watts out of.
They try to make it economical and efficient and run in a small portable package for a long duration. And, well, that's the end result.
Compromises.
Someone should make an amplifier that runs off of these 40-volt packs that are coming with the drills and stuff now.
Drill
I
batteries.
bet they got some juice there. You got 40 volts available?
Well, we've been talking about this for a long time. The energy really is much less of an issue now,
yeah,
Yeah.
right.
considerably less of an issue. The trouble is, it's a lot of disciplines to understand to do a really good portable device that also runs off a battery that is exceptional. And it seems to be, for whatever reason, impractical for someone to actually accomplish this, to have a really phenomenal battery.
Yeah, you tend
in
to
an
have
amplifier design.
some things done well and then other things
others
are,
not so
yeah, you
much.
specialize in
You
Right.
lack an
one end or
understanding
another.
of
Yeah.
one thing or
Well, usually
another.
I think because that stuff's targeting the price points.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
It needs to be
$200.
sold at Home Depot or whatever, you know.
Yeah, right. Or Amazon.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But you could do a pretty good job today, especially. And it's a little disappointing that nobody has an amazingly exceptional high power portable amplifier.
It's rare. Astone Kern makes a few. And obviously they've been doing it a long time, so they got it down with beefy batteries and so on.
Yeah.
IFI's got the red
Diablo.
Diablo, yeah, which is like
It's pretty big, though, right?
pretty potent. Yeah,
Yeah.
but relatively speaking, well, to do 5 or 6,
Yeah.
whatever hell it's rated for,
It's a lot of power.
that's crazy for a
Right.
portable amp.
It's almost too much power.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it actually is too much.
You
power.
really don't need that.
I think that was the first amp where I'm like, you actually don't need to put it on high.
Yeah.
So-
Medium gain's
Yeah.
fine because it's got so much. I don't know what kind of battery they got in that thing. Well, even then, it doesn't sound like it's a big. It still doesn't sound like a desktop amp plugged into a wall.
Well, no.
You know, it still sounds like it's running off a battery.
Yeah.
But they got obviously they got a pretty good amount of voltage in that thing to be able to put out that kind of watts
Yeah.
into a load. Anyway, we've gone over topic.
Mhm.
Maybe hopefully off topic. Hopefully everyone's kind of from all our gibberish has kind of figured out the difference between gain and
Mhm.
power.
I don't know.
Maybe.
It might be more confusing now.
It could be. It's voltage level versus power.
How much drive is behind that voltage?
Yeah. On that note, everyone, happy 4th of July if you're in the States. Other than that, happy Monday to you. Take care of yourselves. Thank you.